Three, two, one. Well, welcome to another episode of the YES program. YES stands for
Yuma Entrepreneurial Show.
Awesome. We have a great guest today. And before we jump into our interview, we want to go through and go with our quote of the week. Jerry, take it away.
Yeah, so it's actually a quote from a book called Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bonnie Ware. And it says, hospice workers say that the number one regret they hear from dying patients is that they wish they had been courageous enough to live true to themselves and had not been guided by the expectations of others.
Wow.
I read that and thought that was pretty powerful. And our guest today, Chris Wheeler, is somebody that is definitely not afraid to change careers and go into things that are a little bit different and follow his passion. So we're really excited to interview Chris today. But next, after the quote, is Edward's going to give us a health tip.
Health tip for this week. I've been doing this now for probably consistently at least 2 years, on and off for about 5. It seems to be the thing now, but it's apple cider vinegar.
Love
Heard
it.
of this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you started doing this as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
A tablespoon. Start off with a tablespoon. Mix it in with your water, as much water as you can drink first thing in the morning. It's going to cleanse your body. You can Google it. We won't get into it. Try it. Try it for a week, and then try it for a month, and let us know what you think. But
absolutely,
it's a great way to start the morning. And without any further ado, our special guest today, Chris Wheeler. We're going to ask him some questions, learn from him, and he's going to give us some insight on what he's learned during this entrepreneurial journey of his. Jerry's going to start off with the first question. So welcome. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. With your busy schedule.
Yeah. And it wasn't even a question. I sent Chris a text, and he said absolutely, and we really appreciate that, your willingness to come in here and share all your deep, dark entrepreneurial secrets. So,
yeah.
So
surprised.
Yeah. So the first thing is, kind of tell us a little bit about, growing up. Where were you born? How many years did you live in Yuma? When did you leave? All that sort of stuff.
All right. So I was born and raised here in Yuma. I'm, a proud Yuman kind of through and through. I'm 43, so that dates me. I was a child in the early 70s. But yeah, no, I went through the Yuma District 1 elementary school system. So I started off at Pecan Grove, and then
Pecan Grove, me too, buddy.
Oh, sweet,
yes.
Nice. Yeah. So Pecan Grove, and then I, we moved to the other side of town. So I finished up at Raleigh, and then Gila Vista, and then Kofa. Graduated in '91, so nothing special about my my formal education as a youngster.
Mm-hmm. Were you always a good student?
I was a pretty good student. I didn't finish top 10. I finished, I think, 4 or 5 out.
Wow.
But I was like I had more fun than the rest of the top 10 kids.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, but still managed. So then after that, I graduated. Spent about 3 days debating what I was going to do for the summer, and knew that I wanted to kind of get a head start on everything. So I took off to UVA.
Bear down.
Yeah. So I enrolled in the summer program in summer school straight out the gate. I didn't want to miss anything, so all my friends were here going to the river and doing their thing. Mm-hmm. I was knocking out. I had 7 credits before anybody even started. I knew my way around. I had my bearings. I had pretty much the lay of the land, and I knew I wanted that head start.
Yeah. So you made a sacrifice for fun to go out and grind and hustle.
Yeah, well, a little bit, but and it was also interesting getting into the college life when it was a little bit slower, mm-hmm. as opposed to during the just beginning of the semester when I knew it was going to be absolutely chaotic because we'd gone for orientation and I'd seen just the massive amount of people, and I'm like, okay, let's just ease into this. So I spent 9 years at the university. And they call most of those guys doctors, but not me. Yeah. That's the running joke. I did really enjoy school. I started off as a psychology major and realized very quickly that the biological aspect of psychology was something that appealed to me, but I was so far into the program that changing majors or doing something like that was not a possibility, or didn't seem a realistic possibility. So I added another degree to the psych degree and pursued studies in molecular and cellular biology, finished that and realized that during the grad check that I was close to a chemistry degree, and they suggested I finish that one. After that, I did graduate studies in.
So 3 degrees.
Yeah.
Oh,
So after that,
that's amazing.
I did some graduate work in neuroscience. I spent 6 years in Arizona Research Labs Division of Neurobiology, where I worked with the glorious, glorious animals, cockroaches and flies.
Very interesting.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, it's there are better things.
Wow.
Yeah. So
going back, let's backtrack a little bit with your education. You're highly educated, and one of the things that stood out, like Jerry mentioned, that you went for the grind instead of hanging out with the friends at the river. You started at college. What was your upbringing like, or did you just have that spirit where I'm going to get this done? Why didn't you slack during that time?
It was I go back and I think about a lot of the things that really made a difference going into high school and into college. And one of the things that we did, and I do it with my son, is we have dinner. Like every night, I sit down and we talk and we kind of decompress the day. So, what was good, what was bad? Was it a great day? Was it a really, really crappy day? What's going on? Well, my parents and I, did that as much as possible. My dad worked a lot. Sometimes he wasn't always there. My mother worked as well. So, but at any given time, there was always at least 2 of us. Nobody ever ate alone. There was this connectedness, and the education and how school was going was always a part of the conversation. And it was a foregone conclusion that college was going to happen. It was never even offered up as what do you think you're going to do after high school? It was, what college do you think you're going to go to? And there was never a question of how it was going to happen. We just knew it was going to happen, whether it was going to be loans or scholarships or something of that sort. So it was one of those sort of naturally occurring things. So when graduation happened and the applications started getting sent in, it was okay. Let's get these in. When are your due dates? Who have you heard back from? And that's the way it really came about.
So it's kind of, your parents were pushing you basically. So let's say you didn't have that support, because my dad was really hard with me, and if it wasn't for him, he kind of guided me through. So was it more your parents that guided you through that and said, hey, you're going to college no matter what? Or you said, this is what I want to be, psychologist or what have you, and you had that passion?
Kind of a split answer. My parents were very enthusiastic about me going to school. My mother was not so enthusiastic about me going away very, very far. So Arizona schools were kind of in the running. So that was one factor. The factor that that yes, the expectation was that I was going to go to school. That I was walking into it with a full academic ride, so the cost burden wasn't there. And then, to be completely frank, I was dating a girl that was going to U of A. So
that's a little motivation.
It was, like, what are you going to do? You're going to go.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's how I ended up there. I mean, it was kind of a 3-pronged thing.
And then, so you were out of the community for a number of years, and then
I left. So I left in '91, and I didn't come back until 2010.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
So I spent about 16 years in Tucson, and then from Tucson, I moved over to San Diego, and then San Diego back here.
Okay.
So, like everybody else, at some point you finish school and life catches up with you, and you have to go out and get a real job.
Yeah,
so,
and then you feel like having a Mr. G's burrito back in Yuma, and then
I've never been more than about 2-3 hours away, so they travel pretty well.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
absolutely.
That was it was good getting out. It was one of the things that I think that I would, as a professional and somebody that's going to work and be successful, you have to go out and get a different perspective and understand what it's like where things work on a larger scale. I run into people all the time at the brewery when we're talking to them that really haven't ever left Yuma. They don't have that perspective of how things work outside of the way they work here. Yuma's a great place. It's a nice little microcosm for a lot of larger places, but the nuances that you find in a bigger city and bigger operations and larger corporations and just municipalities in general, that you can, if you expose yourself to them and you bring them back here, I think that's helpful.
Absolutely. I always thought that part of the college education was just going and living in another city, figuring out how to survive, learn the new roads, where's the restaurant, where are the grocery stores, and it's all part of that.
Right.
And you see different cultures too, especially if you grow up in Yuma and you don't know anything else. I mean, when I was growing up, I thought us Mexicans were the only Hispanics around, and you got all these different dialects of Spanish and everything. So yeah, that you learn so much.
And I think part of it is taking you out of your comfort zone, and your support structure goes away. So you figure out very, very quickly how to build a new support structure, and if you don't, and everyone knows them, we all know kids that have gone and failed, and then they're back 2 years later, or a year later, or 6 months later. So it's a very, very steep learning curve. You figure it out, or you don't.
Yeah. So that's something that the comfort zone, we talk about that a lot on the show, is pushing that. Is that something that you always strive to do, and is push that comfort zone, even though you may not like why you're doing it, but you know you're doing the right thing?
Sometimes if it doesn't feel good, you know you're kind of on the right course. If there's a level of discomfort going forward, and you know me well enough to know that I'm not risk averse. I do get a thrill out of the adrenaline that comes with putting yourself in a situation where you don't know. I mean, I moved to I grew up in Yuma, and my Spanish is appalling, and I don't really speak Spanish. So one of the things that I did was during one of my years in university was move to Mexico, and I moved to Guadalajara for a summer, and then I kind of backpacked through the country on we would call it the chicken bus. I mean, literally there were goats and chickens and things like that. But it was $10 to get from one city to the next. And sometimes the bus would break down, and you'd have to fend for yourself and find a place to stay overnight until the bus was fixed the next day. And it was the scariest thing in the world. But I came back at the end of the summer and just like, okay, if I can survive this, I'm good.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It was good. Just consistently putting yourself in the position of maybe being in a business that you don't necessarily understand 100%, or in an organization that is unfamiliar. I mean, it's one of those things where once you get your bearings and you know you can do it, you kind of force your way through it
and figure it out.
Yeah, the adrenaline helps.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
great. Which brings us to the next question. Most everybody knows you in town, but for those of you who don't, what are you currently doing right now?
For the guy that's giving out the health tips, I'm the beer guy, so you're sitting next to the wrong person.
No, there's a lot of healthy aspects to having a nice cold. We can attest to that.
Yes.
Moderation.
So I am the co-owner and head brewer at Prison Hill Brewing Company. My daily job consists of getting up at about 4 in the morning to start making beer at 5, and I do that 3-4 days a week. The rest of it is the logistics of running a business, and there are worse jobs to have. The other day I get to say, hey, what did you do? I made beer. Yeah, I made a lot of it.
And you love it.
It's great. Yeah, it's great.
So how did you get into brewing beer? Did you do that did you have a side business in college brewing beer? How did that come about?
And I'll caveat this: kids don't try this at home. It was, I knew that I liked beer. I was in college. I didn't have a fake ID, and back in the day, Rolling Stone magazine used to sell beer kits in the back of the magazines that all you had to do was check a box. It says, if I'm under 21, I will not consume this. It wasn't illegal to buy. And then you could buy bottles. So me and a couple of friends started brewing our own beer to basically avoid having to try to get fake IDs or go get somebody to buy us beer.
Yeah.
And so, it becomes a home brewing thing, and then the home brewing kind of, it catches on. You want to get kind of more and more into it. I met a guy in Tucson when I was in school named Nimbus, who was also a home brewer, and the fledgling Nimbus Brewing was just getting started. And so I jumped in there and stayed there for 2.5 years. And it was at one point we may have been the biggest in Arizona. In terms of brewing, but so I cut my teeth on a system that was kind of put together, sort of a Frankenbrew system, a little piece here, a little piece there, with a bunch of guys that knew what they were doing, and
or at least we're figuring it out.
Yeah, and we figured it out along the way. I mean, it was more of a brewing cooperative at one point, and then we had some guys that came and bought us out. That changed the dynamic, and that's pretty much when I think the bulk of us left. But and then we were all in school. I mean, Nimbus was a nuclear physics PhD student. I was doing my thing. I mean, we had engineers and wastewater guys and philosophy majors, and I'm trying to think of who else was there. I mean, we had a couple of chefs. So it was just this really interesting amalgam of people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, people that you wouldn't typically think of as entrepreneurial.
Right, and that might not have otherwise come together without the common interest that you share. So, and it's good. It functions very much like a general board of directors now. If you've ever sat on a board of directors, it's a multidisciplinary thing, and everyone brings a different perspective from it. So, in looking back at it, that was a good experience because it taught me how to relate to people from other professions.
So those guys, those sharp handful of people, you guys had the same mindset, and so you just like beer. It's cliche, but you like beer, but you're entrepreneurial spirit, highly educated, smart individuals. There's a lot of people who love beer, but I bet you they didn't have the same mindset as the ones that you're hanging out with. So I guess what I'm getting at is that it's kind of cliche that we talk about this a lot. Is you got to hang out with people who have the same vision as you.
I do to some degree think that like begets like. I mean, people with sort of a shared goal or maybe a shared common vision tend to aggregate together. You'll find people that are driven tend to surround themselves with people that are driven, and whether or not that's a conscious decision that I've made in my life, or something subconscious that you just recognize as a trait in somebody, that I really couldn't put my finger on. But for whatever reason, that's always been the people that I've been around. They just,
it's kind of what you put out comes back to you.
I do. I in a weird sort of metaphysical way, I think that's probably got a little something to do with it.
Absolutely, I agree. I agree 100%.
So how did you? Okay, so you're into brewing beer. Come back to Yuma. How does Prison Hill Brewery start?
Wow. Okay. With a conversation, with 6 months worth of conversations. So I, at the time, was, and this is a very meandering path to, opening a business. So after college, I went into the medical field, and I spent a lot of time in operating rooms. I worked for a company and then started my own business where, it put me smack in the middle of ORs. Well, the business was successful enough to where I was able to leave that one, sell it, come back, spend some time with my family, and in the process of, basically exploring coming back to Yuma, and the intention was never really to stay here for very, very long, but just to be close to my parents, and my parents were having some health concerns. I took a position at the YMCA, which kept me here as director, and in the process of building that new one, got to meet a number of people. Well, during that time, downtown was undergoing sort of its changes. They'd redone the street and just, I think, finished it right as I'd moved back. My two partners had explored the possibility of opening a new bar downtown. And I'd known Amy, one of my partners, for probably 10, 15 years at that point. I mean, a fairly long time. She knew that I had the brewing background, and the conversation started to, Pine House has been successful. Do we think that a brewery is a possibility? And if it was, one, could you contribute to go in? And two, what's your thoughts on it? So, after a number of conversations, we decided, and the availability of a great location, which is everything.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We decided to pull the trigger on it.
That's really neat. And we've talked about this in the past, but there was a brewery downtown, several years ago, and they made a good run at it, and it ended up closing. And so, did you hear from people? Breweries won't work in Yuma. It's been tried. It won't work.
It was the number one. It was. I could tell you before I told anybody what I was doing. The minute I told you, I'm getting ready to open a brewery, I could tell you with absolute certainty what was going to come out of their mouth next. It was, there was a brewery on Main Street, and it didn't work. Yeah. It was the exact thing that everyone that had seen Monarch Trust, that they told me the same thing.
Yeah. So explain that, how you and your partners pushed through that. You just had you just knew in your gut that what you guys were going to do, the way you would attack it, would be different.
It was a different vision. So I think that in terms of scalability, Monarch Trust was very, very ambitious. It was very large in what it did. It was also slightly ahead of its time. Ian was a visionary in that respect. And had the economy not taken a downturn, I think he would have had a real chance of doing something very, very good. His equipment was phenomenal. I mean, it was beautiful stuff, and it was it was high end. It was very, very well done. But I think the way it was approached gave us a lot of insight. We knew that we had to really adjust the menu and the beer options to what the Yuma palate was. And the Yuma palate at that point only had one really craft brew location here in town. Two, if you want to count another place, but it was more of a chain restaurant. And in shaping that, it really dictated what we put on our menu and the way we did it, and the approachability of the offerings. So, you can go and open a brewery and brew all strong ales that are just phenomenal in terms of technique and precision and the things that you have to do to make them. But if it doesn't appeal to the customer base, you're just sitting on piles of money. So the idea is to move a product that's appealing to the general population, and at the same time, make it fit in the confines of what you developed. So that was the general approach that I took, knowing that it was an evolving palate here in town, and that you really wanted, from a menu perspective, food that goes good with beer. And we think there's sort of a synergy in what we've developed, and it's been successful so far.
It's definitely something that I've always done in my life, is when people tell me I can't do something, I just love it, because then I'm really going to do it.
Gives you that motivation.
Oh,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's great. So Chris, we're kind of winding this thing down a little bit, but so this is a real important question we were talking about before we started recording, but I'd like to, could you share with us, have you ever failed?
Yes.
And in failing, what was your biggest failure that that comes to mind, and more importantly, what did you learn from it?
So, I'll say this: I'm not risk averse. I like getting out there, sometimes to the point of detriment. The distributorship in California wasn't always successful. I mean, there was a point where we're about 70,000 into it, and it clearly wasn't working. And when you have, actually, we're probably more than that. We were probably a little over, and it doesn't matter. It was expensive.
Enough to
keep
you up at night. Yeah.
Enough to get your attention, and as somebody that wasn't, not made of money, that really is one of these things where it's like, okay, re-examine what you're doing right, figure out what you're doing wrong, and acknowledge when occasionally you have to cut your losses. It smarts, it takes beating, but at the end of it, you figure out, okay, now I made this series of mistakes, and those were all completely avoidable. Had I known then what I know now, would I have made those mistakes? Absolutely not. But the lesson going into it is sometimes you got to try and figure it out and learn, because you can ask everybody in the world, and maybe these people that you're asking haven't made the same mistakes either. Maybe the mistakes just haven't had the opportunity to be made. Yeah. And learning from that, it's costly. Every one of those mistakes cost me, if you divide them up, the X number of thousands of dollars. But at the end, that's the price you're paying for a lesson. It's an expensive price, but I don't make those same mistakes anymore. Yeah. And then being able to scrape yourself up off the ground and start over and push through it, that's an exercise in its own right.
Absolutely.
So,
and is that almost like a muscle? That the more you go through it, the easier it gets, I guess, to a certain extent.
It's one of those things where you wake up in the morning, you're like, was I dreaming? Oh, no, that's real. And you just one foot in front of the other, and you hop out of bed, and you just you really just motor yourself through it. Valuable, probably the most valuable business lesson is experiencing failure and being able to realize that it's failure and either correct it and turn it into something different, or just get through it. Yeah, it's going to happen. And I'll say this: I think the biggest, nobody likes regret. The biggest regret ever is not trying. So if the fear of failure is the thing that keeps you from trying, that's going to haunt you for the rest of your life.
At the end, when you're on your deathbed, you may have been safe and secure your whole life by not taking risks, but in those last moments of your life, you're really going to reflect back and have some major regrets.
I could have failed at everything I've ever done, and I would have been more satisfied at the end than being successful at one or two things that I tried, but I'd still regret all the things that I passed by.
Absolutely.
And fear of failure is not something that that should ever stop you from doing something.
That's great. Those are nuggets, folks. Nuggets.
Yeah. Very, very, very good and insightful. We know you're passionate about beer. What I find really interesting is that you again, you were educated, wanted to be in the medical field, but then you always loved beer.
Yeah.
And now here you are, after graduation in 1991, doing what you love, which is beer. But then you're actually getting paid for it. It's your living.
Go figure.
Right.
And I research trips that involve going to breweries allow me to travel and experience things that I wouldn't otherwise get to experience and meet people that I wouldn't otherwise meet. I should have stayed doing this 20 years ago when I had the chance. But like everything, it's just it's beer. Unless you work for Budweiser or Miller or Coors, it's not going to be anything.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden there's 6,000 microbreweries in the country, and it's the biggest expanding segment in the market. So, again, if I'd have known then what I knew now, who knows? Maybe I'd be retired. But
Okay.
it's.
But again, maybe you learned some lessons while you went and started
Oh, yeah.
other businesses that definitely transfer over to.
Right. It would have been a much harder, much longer road. But it's nice being able to do something that you love. I like projects. I also like building things. With the brewery, I have the opportunity to expand, which is what we're doing right now. And you're continually growing, continually innovating, and there's going to be continued expansion in what we're doing. So that involves setting up sort of sub businesses or at least divisions of what you're doing. You have a distribution operation, you have supply line operations, you have general staffing. We've got a full kitchen. We'll have a full brew house. We're going to end up with a full brew house staff and cellaring staff. And then you have the logistics of getting your beer out because distribution happens. So now you have to manage that. So that's all. It keeps it continually interesting because the business evolves.
So your passion essentially has gone to such a point now where you're actually bringing in dollars into our community, providing jobs to people in our community, careers for people in our community.
Yeah, that's and that's absolutely was part of the plan from the beginning. So. It's nice to be able to have a business that's going to be able to bring in outside money and outside revenue. So it's one thing to take $1 and eat at a restaurant here, and then at my place maybe eat at a restaurant around the corner. But the more restaurants open up in one city, the more you split that exact dollar. We have the ability to have a piece of that, but also in the ability to export out of the county and out of the city, and potentially even out of the state eventually, to bring outside revenue into Yuma. And
so export your products and import.
and even if it's only 100 miles away, if it's $1,000 here or $2,000 there, it's coming in from outside the city, and that's money that's coming in, and that's great. I mean, that just goes back into the community because we get it, we spend it, whether or not it's out of our pockets or on products. We do everything that we can to source as much as we can locally, so that stays here.
Absolutely.
And that's good.
And that we appreciate what you do for our community.
It's the right thing to do.
And as we wrap up here, I want to take the time to thank you, Jerry as well. He worked hard to get you in here on your busy schedule, so we appreciate what you do for the community.
My pleasure.
For taking the time to do this. And one last question. For those people who are in the struggle or saying, well, he found his passion, that's, he's already set, and we don't realize how much work goes into it or what he went through. Any advice for the entrepreneurs out there or even somebody who has a job who says, man, I just wish I could do that, but
I have this great idea that I would love to do.
I think there's a lot of advice I give, but in general, don't let somebody tell you no. Find a way to do it. If you have to bus tables or bartend or do something to generate the capital to start whatever it is that you're doing, do that. Work very, very hard. A lot of people think, I'm just going to go out and I'm going to find an investor and I'm going to ask for money. That doesn't really work. You have to have something under your belt before somebody is going to invest in you, unless you've got a really rich uncle. And maybe that's the case, in which case, by all means, do it. But in general, bootstrap the daylights out of something. And getting back to that failure thing, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to start something once. I think most business owners will tell you that they've had 2 or 3 failed projects in the past before they do something right. That's true, and again, those are expensive lessons, but it gives you the skill set to complete and maybe refine your vision, and tenacity. I mean, people all the time, you say, oh, you went to school for a long time, you must be smart. I'm not smarter than the next guy, I think that it's the ability to, be tenacious, is, just don't stop. Somebody
Find a way.
Find a way. If there's a brick wall in front of you, go over it, go through it, go around it. Just don't stop until you absolutely can't go anymore, because if you do, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, and you'll have that regret.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
So that's amazing.
Yep. Thank you again.
Yep. Chris, thank you very much. Enjoy it.
Thank you for joining us as well. Please give us comments or feedback, and we will see you next week.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Cool, man.